We're going to go ahead and get started with, are there any bill introductions? Do I have anyone here with a bill introduction? I'm not seeing any, so we're going to move right into our agenda. And yesterday, we received all kinds of information from the Kansas Department of Education with regard to what's going on by the numbers for our K through 12, pre-K through 12. And today we're taking a look at higher education. And so we are going to start with our presentation from Dr. Blake Flanders. He's the President and CEO of the Board of Regents. Thank you so much for being here today with us.
Thank you, Chair Baumgardner and members of the committee. I appreciate being asked to walk through some of our numbers and really provide some context around those numbers as we look at how to grow our economy and increase the education of our citizenry. If you just go through the slides and you look at student attainment and enrollment, we've got 32 public higher education institutions. We have a database where all those institutions report their numbers. The governed 6 state universities, Washburn University, which is a municipal university that's coordinated, and then we coordinate the 19 community colleges and 6 technical colleges. And everyone reports into the database, and you can see there of the 32, we had almost 224,462 students enrolled. It shows the numbers of credentials. We really look at short-term certificates that are generally delivered mostly by the community and technical colleges, certificates and associate's degree, and all the way up through doctoral degrees. Our total number of degrees, it was down, it decreased by just over 1,000 credentials, down 2.3% from the previous year, where we almost were at 44,000 in AY 2020. On the next slide, I have a line graph that really points to our academic year enrollment. And you'll hear quite a bit of information about the effects of the pandemic. And I would say that that is a shorter term issue for us, but we have some longer term, I'll call them headwinds, and they may be opportunities that we need to address as a system. If you look at those numbers, you can see that we've been on a steady downtrend, although the last year, when you look at the pandemic, the impact of the pandemic, those numbers were sharply lower than the previous year. On the next slide, I've broken out that enrollment and just provided some line graphs by the different sectors. So we have the public university totals, community college totals, and technical college totals. And, you know, just taking out the last year and just really looking at the longer term trends, I would say the universities generally, the state universities, Washburn Washburn's enrollments have went a little closer, looked a little closer to the community college enrollments. State universities are flat to down, to slightly down. The community colleges have experienced sharper declines over that time, and the technical colleges have generally been up. And I think some of that is part of some policy, such as Senate Bill 155 or the Excel in Career and Technical Education. And I do think we're doing a better job letting people know of the benefits of some of these technical careers and the opportunities that are there. On slide 6, I can show you year over year where we were in terms of census headcount enrollment. And I know that Heather Morgan's going to, and Jim Jeanette are going to talk about this later, so I won't spend a lot of time. But if you look, we can say, well, look at the high school dual enrollment. So when we talk about dual enrollment, we talk about a student who's typically a junior or senior in high school and enrolls in a college class. We can celebrate the fact we were up 28.6%. But really, if you look at the year before, we were down 25.2%. So we don't have a lot of growth there, even though we were sharply up. What happened that year before is our schedules were not aligned. And so I'm happy to report we're meeting with the state board. We finally have all of our spring breaks aligned in the system. That seems like a real simple thing, but it's critical for students, particularly those students in high school, so that we can get these schedules aligned. When they weren't, those students really weren't able to participate at the same levels, and as a result, those enrollments went down. As on the next slide, I just highlight some of the differences in terms of race and ethnicity in the system. If I try to look at 10-year changes, the one-year change gives us information on what's happening probably with COVID and in the short term, but the 10-year, 5 and 10-year really gives us an idea of what's happening maybe longer term. The white student population's down 21%, Hispanic students are up 50%, black students are down 21%. So that's kind of what's happening. What we know is, and the board is focused on, is our system is going to have to be responsive to serving more rural students where we're losing ground and more minority students if we're going to grow the economy in Kansas and if we're going to be able to sustain the amount of credential production we needed for our businesses to be profitable. If you look at the next slide, the academic year enrollment by age groups, we generally see that younger age groups increasing. We think that's much due to the Senate Bill 155 policy. We have more high school students. We started with that program with about 3,500 students were attending technical education at the post-secondary level in high school. I think we got up to almost 14,000. I don't have those numbers right in front of me, but it's down a little through the pandemic, but those will recover. So that piece of it has really grown. That's kind of a highlight as to what policy can do.
I do have a question from Senator Solentrop.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Real quick, Blake, looking at these declines in enrollment, are you tracking or can you track students going outside of the state for education? And if so, is that part of any of this trend?
Yeah, so we track that through the clearinghouse. Here's what we can see. We know exactly who's coming to the public system. And then we look at, and the independents also, those more church affiliated, Matt Lindsay's group here. But then the clearinghouse can show us how many actually went to college. So we're not really losing ground. I've got some slides on that later, but we're not really losing ground in people going outside the state as much as we're losing ground on students going to college, period. And that's an issue for us. And we have some things that we're implementing as a system. We've actually got some federal support to do that I'm hopeful about, and I think we're discussing with the state board some policy changes. One thing that we can do that we've just been in discussion about is how to make filling out the federal financial aid a graduation requirement. States that have done that have increased that. The college going rate has increased. And for many of our programs, such as the Promise Act, I'm not going to talk a lot about Promise because I know the two-year colleges are going to, but they have to fill that out to be eligible. So, and we know that everyone can't do that, but many could and could be eligible for those funds.
Madam Chair, if I may, can you supply us with anything similar to this grid on students that are going out of state for education?
I can just show you the total college going rate and the differences, and you can kind of tell who's going out.
Thank you very much.
Senator Petty.
I'm not talking in the right place. I have two mics and I'm not talking to either one. On the chart that you had shown us for ethnicity of students going to higher education. Could you also provide us a graph of the percentages of the population? Because our Hispanic population is increasing overall, and so it would make sense that we're seeing. I mean, I would hope.
I actually can, so I will send that to you. We used to just say, what's your enrollment, and how does that mirror our state population? We were always doing pretty well until we said, what's your enrollment of Kansas students, and how does that mirror the population? So we're doing a good job recruiting minority students from other states to come here. I think we need to do more of that. But we're not serving really in three groups primarily. We're not serving enough Hispanic students, we're not serving enough African American students, and we're not serving as many rural students. We've seen some sharp enrollment declines in rural areas. So I'll provide that. I'll get you that information.
Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Blake, for being here. Kind of on those same lines, on the first slide, you have it broken down between the certificates and associates, and then do you have that broken down by the ethnicity and race?
Yes, we do.
I would like that if that's available. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions, so let's go ahead and move forward.
All right, and I've got a breakdown here on page 9 of some residency and non-residents. I think the policy generally, when the state support was incredibly high for post-secondary education, really the thought was non-resident tuition needs to be much higher because people haven't paid into this system. And then as we've struggled with enrollments and we've seen other states do that, and we're trying to build a workforce, and now the workforce requires some post-secondary credentials. Now, not necessarily a baccalaureate degree for everything, but could be a certificate, could be an associate degree. As we see that, I'm encouraging institutions to be more aggressive with recruitment. I think Wichita State University with that I-35 corridor strategy is something that we really need to look at as a system. It is harder, perhaps, for two-year colleges to attract students from out of state, although they do have activities where that does happen. And then once we get them here, we've got to think about ways, how do we connect them with a Kansas business once they're here with work-based learning opportunities so that we can get more of them to stay. That's going to be really important. We're not going to be able to continue to recruit and grow companies without additional trained workforce. So then I just put together some slides on some longer term and shorter term trends. We kind of talked some about that. We have some changing demographics. I want to talk a little bit about academic achievement and our pipeline coming in terms of college readiness, because as a system we need to address those issues, and just looking at our college going rate. In terms of demographics, our systems really do a good job serving students from families where the parents went to college. So traditionally, that's been an easier market. But what we have to do is think about how do we get into homes that what we would say is more first-generation students, where their parents maybe didn't graduate from college. We're going to have more first-generation students. We have more Pell-eligible students from lower-income families. Kansas is more racially diverse. And we need to think about more students from rural areas of our states where we've really seen those drop off. If you look at the demographics of the Kansas high school graduates, those have really changed in the last 10 years on slide 12. Hispanic students increase of 2,600, white students down over 1,900 students over that time period. And I think that, so that's something that if we just look at the demographics, we know that our systems need to adjust And that's why that's one of the board's priorities is how do we better serve Hispanic students and minority students. On page 13, I have some information just on college readiness. And this isn't how we determine college readiness necessarily, but this is ACT. ACT, you take the ACT and they have benchmarks in there where you're college ready. And it doesn't mean that you're a straight A student. I think if they say you're college ready, you have maybe a 50% chance of getting a B and a 70 or 80% chance of getting a C. I think that's their benchmark, but they would determine you as college ready. And they look at 4 different areas: English, math, reading, and science. And then I always look at what's it take, how many met all 4. So if you look 7 years ago, we had 30% of the high school students who were testing all 4 areas as college ready. Today, it's at 23%. So it is on a relatively sharp decline. Now, part of that is due to the fact that maybe more students in Kansas are taking the ACT. So we recognize that that's some of it, but there's more to it than that. We have a lower percentage of students who are going to be college ready. So what's that mean for us? That means we're going to lean on, maybe Heather Morgan's going to talk on it, we're going to lean on the community colleges, some of the technical colleges, to provide more developmental education. And we need the best practices for developmental education. So we used to put students in a sequence of courses, and they never got out of that sequence. Didn't work very well. So the better way now, that's more research-based, is to try to get students into credit-bearing courses sooner and give them tutor assistance while they're in those courses. And their system is converting to that research-tested way. But I think on page 13, you can see we're going to be really providing more developmental education. And then on the next slides, I've got a bar graph just showing how this breaks down due to race and ethnicity. And as we look to increase our numbers in terms of Hispanics, African Americans, we're also going to be relying on how do we give assistance to every group. If you look at if you're ready in all 4, if you go clear to the right there, you can see in terms of this labels as black students, we've got a 6%, all 4. So that's going to be one of our challenges as a system, and one that we're going to primarily be relying on community colleges and technical colleges to address.
Senator Sykes has a question.
Thank you. I appreciate this. This is the college readiness by subject for all Kansas students, correct? Do we have this for those who have applied to the universities? So if we're at 57% for all Kansans, but KU has their applicants, do we know where they fall in line?
Yeah, I could pull that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So then, it really also follows income. If you look at the next slide, you can look at those benchmarks. And what's amazing to me is those increments of income, it keeps getting higher all the way to $150,000 a year. So, as those two things come together, households that have higher income, it may be no surprise those benchmarks for ACT, for readiness, increase. And on slide 16, this is really not a real sophisticated chart, but it's one that just shows our public college going rates from 2014 to 2020. We know we can add about 6 percentage points if we look at the private institutions, and 10% of the high school students will go out of state. So you add to that. But we don't see, in those clearinghouse numbers, we don't see that we're losing a lot of market share to others, is what I've been told, because that was my first thing, is we're losing a lot of students out of state. But our college going rate from 2014 to 2020 has dropped from 55% public college going rate to 44.8%. So this is a concern. We have got to get more individuals from our systems into the high schools in an advising capacity, talking to students about career pathways, not necessarily college pathways, but career pathways, and then what kind of education do you need so that you can get that good job and have that great career. And then on the next slide, I just break that down percent by race and ethnicity, and you can see that Asian and white students have higher public college going rates, and Hispanic and black students have lower going rates. And then if you look at our state population, as those demographics are changing, it's no wonder that our public college going rate is decreasing. I'll just speed up here, and we've broken that down so you can see by free and reduced lunch, and those schools where that concentration is higher generally just follows that as you'd expect. I've also on 19 have a graph on how we're doing serving Pell eligible students, and those numbers are dropping as well. That's a concern of mine that those numbers, because we're going to be needing to serve more Pell eligible students, and honestly, the community college tuition has not increased sharply. And so this is more than just a price issue. This is really much more than that. This is about helping students to get a pathway, knowing that they can go to college. One regent said, we've got to stop saying you have to be special to go to college. We've got to provide, when I say a college opportunity, I'm talking about broadly, technical college, community college, university. We need almost all of our students taking advantage of that pathway in some vein, whether it be a short-term credential and you go right into the workforce, maybe sometime later you come back and get additional credentials. I know that the two-year colleges are going to discuss dual enrollment, so I won't spend time on that or the Promise Act, but I did want to just say there still is a value proposition when it comes time for post-secondary education. A baccalaureate prepared person in the state of Kansas earns about $67,800. A high school prepared $40,000, an associate's almost $49,000. So those are averages, and I know individuals get lost in the averages. We can all point to someone who didn't have a degree and did really well, or didn't have any additional training beyond post-secondary and did really well. But the numbers, all we're saying is it gives you the best chance of succeeding in our economy. I just included also that I read where the Kansas Chamber recently released its annual business leaders poll, and obviously workforce was at the top of that list, and we believe we need additional work-based learning to connect these students to Kansas companies so that they can hopefully choose to live and work here. So with that, I'd stand for any questions.
Committee, are there any additional questions? Senator Petty.
Like I might be kind of slow on this, but I'm looking at that graph that that says 2020 public college going rates. So those
Slide 18.
I'm sorry. Yes, it is slide 18. Okay. And it's who
Qualify for free and reduced?
So who does this, when it says high concentration?
So if the high school has a high concentration, the college going rate is about 35%. If the school has a low concentration, it's 53%. So what it shows us is we need to get into schools where we have large numbers of free and reduced students. That's where I think the biggest payoff, if you will, or return will be. I've talked to Commissioner Watson about this. We have, in some counties, the schools, that there's just a high number of students with free and reduced. Yeah, yes, and so we do have a program there where we walk students through the process and show how that might work. And we just need to do that in more places. I'm encouraged. We have a FAFSA competition right now. It's just a competition. We break it in 1 through 6A, just like the sports would. And I'm encouraged that Dodge City was the lowest, and then they had the highest growth. So we gave them an award for having the highest growth. And so they've really turned it around just by starting to talk about it and focus on that. I think there's a lot more we need to do. We need to get better as a system, and I'm not talking about just higher ed, but us working together with K-12. We plan on meeting with the State Board of Education. We're going to hear from the graduation task force this month at the board, and then we plan to meet with them again next month to really talk about some initiatives we can do together.
And then just secondly, the graph number 16 where it says public college going rates, and you've got the 2014 to 2020, and I'm just wondering if there had been also on this page an arrow about public investment.
So
How that would have correlated.
So public investment since 2009, now the governor's budget is good for us this year, but since 2009, we've been just flat. So the system in terms of universities, we've seen increases in community colleges and technical colleges because of Excel and career and technical education. The legislature's done a great job, for the most part, fully funding that program. But in terms of the base state aid, that's the one I'm talking about. It's from 2009 been generally flat. So if you think about the inflation increases and all that, that's kind of where the state investment's been. This issue's bigger than state investment, but that's one component.
Senator Dietrich.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Blake, for being here, Dr. Flanders. So if I could, I've got two quick things. It sounds like you need a lot of, and you did mention that you're going to collaborate with the State Board of Education, because it sounds like a lot of the data that you're collecting and the information that you're presenting to us today, if you want them to do something with the FAFSA, that would be at the high school level, right?
Correct.
Whether it could be a curriculum requirement or a graduation requirement, so that would take the state board's input on that.
And we're meeting about that and having those dialogues. They're considering that. We'll have to give parents a way to say, hey, I don't choose to. They have to be able to opt out. Right. But if the default is you go ahead and begin that process, other states, we've seen that increase.
And then the other thing is the ACT data. So I know we've kind of gotten away from using the ACT as a guide in curriculum content over the years. So again, you'll need the state board's help if you want to raise your ACT scores. If that's the data that you're going to use to make sure the kids are college ready, because not everybody teaches to the ACT. You know what I'm saying? In the 286 school districts in Kansas, it would take the high school staff's agreement to teach that content, specifically to the ACT, to see those scores raised significantly, is my thinking. Am I wrong?
Yeah, and so there'd be some differences between an aptitude test and an achievement test. I took the ACT a number of years ago. I would hope that if you completed a math curriculum in high school, that you would be successful on the ACT.
You would hope.
Yeah.
I don't know that we can draw that direct correlation. So again, I think you need the K-12 folks to weigh in on that, right? Don't you think? Yeah. And then the very last thing I would say is, you and I talked a little bit before that we gathered here today about the dyslexia report. I saw a draft of that in early December, and there was feedback from the higher education institutions about what they're doing with their pre-service training for teachers. So can you give us more detail and maybe at a later date on what the universities are doing? Because I think that's important too, because we're going to have to improve the way we teach our students to read at the earliest levels to be successful at your level?
Yeah, so I'd love to come back and even bring deans of education and dig into exactly what we're doing there. I do know that on those reading levels, those early reading levels, if a student falls behind there, we might be successful with the individual, but collectively, it is really hard to ever catch up. And so that's a crucial
Absolutely agree.
time period.
Thank you. Thank you for all you're doing.
All right, thank you.
Very quickly, because we have two other folks that are giving testimony. Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll make it very quick. Thank you for being here. Two quick questions. One is, what I see throughout this presentation is that college readiness has gone down. And granted, you were saying various reasons for that, but I see my role as a senator as being a person who watches over the taxpayer dollars. And as we've seen more and more monies go toward, I'm a former teacher here, going toward education, but yet we are seeing scores go down, what would you say to the taxpayer?
If you're talking about the K-12 system, I wouldn't be in a position to answer that. I'd have to look and see why. So if you have students in certain subgroups, this could be the great paradox. You could be rising in subgroups, but if certain subgroups are increasing in population and they began lower, that could be one of the issues. I just don't feel like it'd be my place to comment on that.
Then my second question is, along with what you were just stating about your place, would you explain the place of the Kansas Board of Regents?
So the Board of Regents, we govern the state universities, we coordinate the community and technical colleges, and we regulate the for-profit institutions.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Heather Morgan. She's the Executive Director of our Kansas Association of Community College Trustees. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, committee. I'm going to try to wing this a little bit because we did not collaborate, and so I have some of the same stuff, but I think I have plenty to say, and we'll still leave time for President Janot to also testify before y'all need to leave. So I'm Heather Morgan. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas Community College Association. You have my testimony in front of you. The pandemic has been challenging for community colleges. However, this fall, we sort of bounced back up and saw students coming back. I will tell you that we have some particular challenges in our healthcare programs. We saw many less students going into healthcare. The pandemic shut down clinical sites. And we also have some standards which are more stringent than maybe need to be for who can teach some of our healthcare classes. So you'll probably see a bill this session related to who can teach the CNA class, and we'll be supportive of an expansion on who can teach that. So when we think about the pipeline of students, if we have all of our programs full, which the community and technical colleges both have programs that are full, that makes this college going challenging for our students if you can't get into the program. I was talking to someone who wanted to do a Kansas Promise Scholarship this week, and they can't get into the program they want to for a year because we're all full in some of our technical programs, and a lot of that has to do with instructors. So I wanted just to kind of put that out on the table to say we have had some pandemic challenges. We've largely been in person the whole time, even at the very beginning of the pandemic. We did it safely and quietly, and figured out how to make things happen because that's what we do. We've always had traditionally more Pell Grant students, poor students who have had a lot of adverse childhood experiences and all sorts of other trauma in their life. And so we know that closing down would be really dramatic to them. I'll tell you, when we did think about closing down, we had students who were going to be homeless, and so we kept our dorms open just because we're not going to put our students out on the streets. So we're used to dealing with challenging situations every day. As a community college system, we're up about, from a headcount perspective, about 4.5% at the 20th day. I will tell you that the community and technical colleges have moved away generally from a semester system, and we run a lot of 8-week classes. So essentially, you can come into our system at any time and start taking classes. So our enrollment only goes up from the 20th day generally. Moving forward, if you're talking about from a full-time equivalent student perspective, we're still up about 1.2% from last year, given we were down a long way. On my slide that talks about our headcount and our FTEs, we break it down into our associate's degrees and our certificates and short-term programs. Our associate's degree programs are generally for students who are going to transfer on and get a 4-year degree, or it'll be a terminal associate's degree like maybe an AAS in welding, or ADN or RN, an associate degree nurse. Those would be more terminal associate's degrees. Generally, about 82% of Kansas Community College students are Kansans. We only have about 17% of our students are from out of state, but 82% of our students in 2021 are part-time. Our students are going to school and going to work at the same time and juggling a lot of different life things. So the word community and technical college gets kind of confusing. Really, the only difference between community and technical colleges, the major difference is how we're funded. Kansas Community Colleges last year provided 78% of the technical education in the state of Kansas. We served over, the number of students in technical education classes was over 56,000 in our community colleges. And I did a little chart and sorted it for you in the testimony that Johnson County Community College is doing about 19% of the tech ed education in the state of Kansas, then WSU Tech, and then Kansas City, Kansas Community College. So when you think about tech ed, think about anything from healthcare, IT, advanced manufacturing and building trades, really a wide variety. And within the healthcare sector, don't just think about RNs. Respiratory therapists have been pretty key during the pandemic. Physician's assistants, things like that, really specialized healthcare programs. The percent of our students who are Excel in CTE, President Flanders mentioned that Excel in CTE is taken off. And you can see the percentage of the college's enrollments which are Excel in CTE students. So we are in high schools every day. High school students are on our campuses every day. The governor's budget includes some transportation money for Senate Bill 155, also known as Excel in CTE. You might think that that's not important, but I cannot stress enough that the barrier for a low-income student to get to our campus, if it's that the school won't transport them, and now the school has money to transport them, we may have just removed a barrier for students to enroll in these classes, and that's really important. Keeping going forward, I tried in my testimony to sort of illustrate the differences between the state universities, the community colleges, and technical colleges, because it's one thing to see system data, but it's like, what is everybody's part in this system? And so I tried to break that down in terms of the number of students who are taking different courses. So this is high school enrollment, the number of high school students. So we had 21,000 students, high school students, taking community college classes last year. That's the equivalent of 6,700 full-time students. The state universities only had 1,600. So we had 21,000 high school students at community colleges, only 1,600 students at the state universities. And this is unduplicated students, so if a student takes Comp 1 and a Senate Bill 155 class, they're not counted twice. You can see that we have a tremendous amount more females than males that are taking our classes, so 57% of our students are females, so that male population is really where we need to be focusing on. Why aren't our males getting involved in career and tech ed? Why aren't they going to those, just general ed classes? We got to tell them that they can, and then we got to figure out what the barriers are from preventing them from doing that. You can also see that we have a predominantly white student population, but we do have 2 minority serving institutions. Garden City and Dodge City are both minority serving institutions. They have the majority of their students are minorities, and that's the Hispanic students. Moving right along, there are 3 types of high school enrollment I wanted to go over. These oftentimes get confusing. Concurrent enrollment means that it's a high school teacher who is properly credentialed and sort of stamped off on by us that is teaching in the high school during the day. We pay them to do that. That's concurrent enrollment partnership. Dual enrollment, the student may be coming to our campus, or we may be sending a college employee into the high school to teach those classes. And then, of course, we have Senate Bill 155. If you look at the growth in the concurrent enrollment partnership at the state universities, I thought it was interesting that most of the growth was in Douglas County. We can drill down by county how many high school students are taking classes at the college level, and I think that's really important. It's a little bit easier from a rural perspective to say, why are there only 10 students from, I'll pick on Pratt County where I'm from, why are there only 10 students from Pratt County taking college classes? Maybe we need to work with the superintendent and the counselors and the principals of those schools and figure out, how do we figure out, is it an online thing? Is it a money thing? What is the barrier from those students taking our classes? Skipping ahead, I listed the courses that high school students are taking and then the percentage pass rate. There's all sorts of research that says that if high school students take college classes while enrolled in high school, they're going to be more successful long-term and more likely to complete an associate's degree. So generally, students who are taking these classes are not needing the remediation you heard Dr. Flanders talk about. So I want to address Senator Dietrich's question a little bit. We at the community college level, we do remediation. We do a lot of it. But we have really strived to keep up with the times and the research about what works. We know that what we call co-requisite remediation works. You're taking the 3-hour college algebra class, but no, it's not 3 hours, it's 5 hours. You're going to come to tutoring on the other 2 days, and you're going to come to regular class the 3 hours. We know that that works. We also use what we call multiple measures. So to Senator Dietrich's point, okay, I got a perfect on the algebra section of the ACT, and I've only had 1 C in my life, and it was in college algebra. So obviously, the ACT did not measure how well I was going to do in college algebra. So what we use is the ACT, a GPA, and then something we call the AccuPlace, or it's a test. We call those multiple measures. Just because I might do good or bad on one test doesn't mean I'm not having problems in the other. Right? If you work hard, hard work is an indicator of success. So those multiple measures allow less students to go into developmental education, and then we just try to put supports around them. Moving on to Excel and CTE, I broke it down by system-wide, how many students. We got about 12,000 students in Excel and CTE classes, and then breaking them down about where they're from. Again, there is some difficulty getting rural students access to these programs, so we have a number of tech ed centers. So Fort Scott runs a tech ed center in Crawford County that is for probably 10 high schools. It's called CTech, the Career and Tech Ed Center. It's funded in part by the casino that went in Crawford County. They get some money from there. We have the La Harpe Tech Center, and actually at the La Harpe we have Allen, Fort Scott, and Neosho Community Colleges, and Cloud now, all offering different classes there to meet the needs of students. So you can take a wind energy class from Cloud in La Harpe, which is by Iola in case anyone doesn't know, in Allen County for rural students. I included some more information on 155, and I'm just going to keep plowing ahead. There is a slide called state funding for Excel and CTE. The legislature has tried, but not always succeeded in making sure we're fully funded. This year's budget does include additional $2.5 million, which I believe will well cover the cost of Senate Bill 155. But we get paid in the rears, so we're sort of doing the honor system, thinking we're going to get paid for delivering the classes. So we appreciate it when you all make sure that we are fully funded. I included a slide that's related to Kansas City, Kansas Community College, and I wanted to give this as an example of one of the pandemic struggles that we have faced. So when we had the shutdown and the schedules got misaligned to start the school year, Kansas City, Kansas had the biggest drop in their high school enrollment. Their students just weren't able to come to our classes. Busing was an issue, all sorts of problems. And so you can see the head count of high school students taking classes at KCKCC went down significantly from 2,100 students to 1,500 students. So the question is, how does KCKCC and USD 500 work together and the other school districts in Wyandotte County to say, we don't want that to happen again. How can we get these students, how can we support them, and how can we get them back on track to make sure that they know that college is an option for them? I screenshotted all of these things from the public data system that's available through KBOR, so you can see a lot of things if you're interested in your county and things like that. The next slide breaks down by county how many high school students are taking classes and the change. This is really interesting for me because if you think about it, you can see which high schools and which school districts are progressive, which are making sure that their students are taking classes, and which maybe aren't. And so there's some opportunity to growth there. Student success rate is also really important. How many students are actually not only taking the classes, but completing the associate's degree or their certificate? And you can see that both the community and technical colleges are having really good success rates, and I included that. If they transfer to another institution, as long as they finish there, that is considered a success. And you can see, based upon if you take a concurrent or dual class, 81% of students are successful. That's much, much higher than our normal student success rate. So our CTE success rate is about 72% for community colleges. So getting students early in those dual and concurrent classes, while they can be supported by the high school faculty, while they can be supported by the people we send into the high schools, is really important. I have some transfer statistics in here. Skipping ahead to the last thing, which I'll just touch on, is money. So how are community colleges funded? We are funded 38% at the local level. We do not get any educational building fund. All of our buildings are taken care of through our local property tax mill levy. Only about 18% of our funding comes from state government. So our locally elected boards of trustees take both the tuition and the mill levy very seriously and try to keep the costs as low as possible. We have some mill levies that haven't increased in 10 years. We have some tuitions that haven't increased in 10 years. We also have a number of schools who have, I'm going to call them special arrangements with the high schools in their area that say, we'll let your high school students come for free, or if you pay for the class now, we'll give you a free class later. Really trying to meet the needs of local businesses and the local community to make sure people get educated. The last thing I'll just touch on is the Promise Act. Roughly 500 Kansas Community College students have taken advantage of the Promise Act so far. Over 50% of those students are in health professions, about 25% are advanced manufacturing and building trades. I think it was 14% was IT and about 10% in education. The average award is $1,500. That is not a lot of money to make sure that those students finish their programs and are successful. We will continue to gather more students, and I will tell you, since my association's website has my phone number, my cell phone number on it, I get a lot of calls from parents and students about the Promise Act, and I answer them all of their questions. We seem to be ramping up here based upon the number of calls I've gotten in the last week, and a lot of them are interested in healthcare professions, but what we're finding is our programs are full. So anything we can do to find qualified instructors, to be able to find then buildings, to expand our technical education programs is really the challenge we are facing. And with that, I'm happy to stand for questions.
Betty, are there questions? Quick question, Senator Petty.
Thanks, Heather, and it's very exciting because we just did pass that legislation, so that's wonderful to hear. Unfortunately, it's for the healthcare fields, it's not just instructors. As you mentioned, it's space and labs.
Mm-hmm. It's all of the above, yes. There's accreditation standards. So if we can find the instructor, then we have to find the space to meet the accreditation standards and also the clinical settings as well.
I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you so much. We will be seeing you next week. Next week, we will be working on the trailer bill for the Promise Act, so we'll hear more about that. Next up, we have Jim Gannant. He is our president of our Kansas Technical Colleges Association. Jim, it's good to have you here again.
Thank you. Good to be back. Hello, everybody. I'm the president of Manhattan Area Tech College, and I represent the Kansas Tech College presidents again this year. Dr. Flanders and Ms. Morgan have deluged you with data. I did not do that because much of it's the same. So in my testimony, we're hitting some real key points from the tech colleges. And I would like to say, I've been in Kansas higher ed off and on in my career for a long time, but especially over the last 7 to 10 years, you should know there's, in the last 5 in particular, there's much more collaboration, communication, cooperation across the higher ed spectrum. We don't talk about it enough. We've broken down a lot of barriers, so I hope we're on a good roll with that. Our enrollment with the tech colleges, as you see from the data, we have been growing. 20th day is a snapshot, and like Heather said, we keep growing after that, but the tech colleges have done well. 5-year average over the last 5 years, even with the pandemic. By head count, we've grown almost 25%. Full-time equivalency over 8%, credit hours over 8%. All of the tech colleges increased in head count this year. Many of us made a very healthy return from the COVID hit from last year. Salina Tech grew by 22% in head count this year to lead the pack. A big focus for us is outcomes. I've worked for Kansas universities, community colleges, and now the tech college. I love them all, but I've got the dream job, all of us in tech ed, because our mission is a little more focused. And so our outcomes are very strong. Again, the K-Board data shows a student with an AAS degree coming out of the tech ed system has a first-year salary of over $40,000 a year. Georgetown University did a composite review of all higher ed in the country 2 years ago. And one of their categories was the net return on investment of your educational value over the course of your career, 40 years. The top 5 public colleges and universities in Kansas for that return over the life of your career: number 1, Washburn Tech. Number 2, KU. Number 3, K-State. Number 4, Manhattan Tech. Number 5, North Central Kansas Tech. 3 of the top 5 tech colleges. We get people into the pipeline quickly. They have less student debt. They're employers. They become employees. They're taxpayers. They're consumers. But what we're really trying to push, and this is where the universities and the community colleges have all worked better together, in the old days, tech ed was a dead end. It was VOTEC. You went there because you're not smart enough to go to college. That's not the case anymore. We have multiple on and off ramps. And the universities are working more and more with us to grab those students because they find out our students have become good learners, but they started with hands-on approaches. They get more excited about learning, and then their employer pays for them to go on to college. A key thing with the tech colleges as well on outcomes is almost 80% of our graduates stay in the state. I have over 75% of my graduates stay in my service area. We're feeding essential occupations in our communities in Kansas. Again, employees, taxpayers, consumers. Finally, on resources, we are the least funded segment of higher ed. We do not have taxing authority. We don't want it because we have great freedom without it. Where we need special help is capital outlay because that has not really changed since 1977. I want to thank you and all the colleagues in the legislature for the maintenance of effort funds at the end of last year's session was a huge help for the tech colleges. But that's where our biggest need is to work through ways that we can help work with facilities and especially equipment because of the tech programs. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Senator Solentrop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you identify the areas of growth, what fields they're going into, what some of the higher volume applicants are?
We're seeing growth, and all the colleges have common programs, but some of us have specialties. So again, Wichita Tech, aerospace. In my case, we're seeing more and more interest in IT. We're seeing more in auto collision, and then we're doing new things related to NBAF and the animal health corridor related to those technologies. Healthcare is up and down. As Heather mentioned, some of our enrollments are down, some are up. The pandemic's affected that greatly. We're also seeing more and more interest in construction trades and the related programs to that. Welding has been strong. And there's a demand for many of us to get into more programs related to training people to be electricians and plumbers because everybody needs them.
Other questions? We'll share this with you. Next week when we are talking about the Promise Act trailer, I would hope that you can be sure to share with us, because we heard early on in the first semester, so fall semester, that tech colleges just kind of blew through the funding that they received from KBOR, and we're needing additional funds. So please share with us if that's fact or fiction, and did you receive additional funds for the fall semester, because you should have.
Yes.
The second thing that we want to know is there were some reports, I never got them verified, but some reports that some of the tech colleges, one in particular, Wichita, that they were not letting first semester, first year tech students be eligible for the promise, that they wanted to wait until they'd completed a semester, be that 8 weeks or 16, before they would be eligible. We want to make sure that that gets addressed because that's one of the things that we intend to fix with the trailer bill.
Right. On that last part, I know as we've talked among ourselves, if we could, many of us have used scholarships as a way just to help them to recruit, but give them higher scholarships for retention purposes. So I think if we can work it that way, that will help us achieve what we both need.
I do appreciate any other, just checking, I'm not seeing any further questions, so thank you so much for being with us. Committee, we are needing to be on the floor in just 2 minutes. I'm seeing no other questions. We have no other presentations planned, so committee is adjourned.